Hello everyone. In this video we're going to continue with our couch object, and if we don't remember, we can see our drawing here. We're going to continue making this thing. Last time we simply made a 2D kind of trapezoid drawing that represents the side of this object from some measurements. We saw 26 millimeters horizontally on the bottom, a sum total of 21 plus 5, 26 millimeters going up. To the left, we went 5 millimeters, and then that last diagonal line along this kind of wall was done for us. And we can see it here. We have these measurements. We're constrained in our sketch. So I think we can move on now. We've done enough to just get one simple shape. So I think before we can use all these other things, they're on other surfaces of a 3D object. Why don't we make that 3D object? That's the first big leap we're going to make here. So I'm still in my sketch, and I know this because I see all my sketch stuff. You can see I'm in this sketch workspace. It has this kind of blue area. I also have the sketch palette that tells me that I'm in it. I can click Finish Sketch here. I can click Finish Sketch here. Whatever I think is appropriate. We have many, many options. I'm going to click Finish Sketch. And here I am. And there is our closed shape. Now, just to kind of prove the point that this is in 3D, notice our cube shows that we're looking at it from the right side, which I mentioned was what I preferred, or the way I visualized it in the past. We're on the right side looking this way. I'm going to click the Home button. And look what happens. It rotates the camera. Excuse me. And we can see the shape is in air. And I'm going to rotate, I'm going to orbit around, and we can see that this is like a flat, this is not really anything. This is like infinitely thin. It has no dimensionality in the third dimension, but it is basically that sketch. And another thing we need to be aware of, as we create things, including sketches, they start to pile up in our kind of browser area. So on the left here, we'll notice there's suddenly a folder called Sketches. If I open it up with a little white arrow, there's sketch number 1. I can name sketches if I like. It's not necessary, and generally speaking, it's not done unless it has a very important role to play many, many times. But in this case, it's going to be used once and then kind of ignored the rest of the time. So I'm not going to name it, but we can. There's a little eyeball next to all the different things as we go along. If I click on it, it's invisible. As we do things, sketches will disappear. If we don't use them anymore, we can always bring them back by turning them to be visible again, and so on. So there's our sketch. It is flat in 3D space, and it doesn't really exist, right? Not yet. There's no object. So the next big leap is, okay, can we take this 2D sketch of nothingness and make it into a 3D object? Pull it in the third dimension so that we see a 3D object. And so there are many ways to do this, but the easiest way is what we call the extrusion tool. And so there's a button here, and it's really great. Fusion is wonderful by giving us all kinds of tooltips. And here's what it says: adds depth to an open or closed sketch profile or face, right? And so we're going to extrude this closed sketch, it's a closed shape, and pull it into a third dimension, and then we're going to end up with a 3D object. Fusion calls these 3D objects bodies, and we'll see that we'll have a body section in our browser as we do this. So we have many options. I can click the button and then select the sketch face or shape here, or I can click on the area and do that first. Notice it highlights it kind of automatically. And then I can click the button. There's no right answer. You do what you're comfortable with. I have it selected. I'm going to click Extrude. Notice what happens. An extrusion little window comes up on our right side. It gives us a little arrow. I can drag it. I can type in a number. There's all kinds of things I can do. And again, we don't know every detail just yet, but these things become more important as we go along. Things to note in this extrusion, notice where it says profile. This is the profile, and it's one selected. If I get rid of it, notice how it's not picked. So if I had selected the extrusion tool first, then it says, hey, what am I stretching into 3D? And that's where you'd have to select a profile. So now I click it, it's back here. So the one that's maybe useful is, where do we start? The default is what's called the profile plane. It starts from this area, from this point in 3D space, which is tied to our origin. But we could also have it start away from the drawing, away from the sketch, some distance. If we put offset, we'd say, you know what, not at the drawing, but 5 millimeters away, forward or backwards, whatever we think is appropriate. And then, even though we can't really use it here, if we were doing this on more complicated scenarios, we could actually start it from the reference point, an object somewhere in our 3D space. Taper angle doesn't really do much for us here. We're not going to mess with that one just right now. And this is the number we're typing with, that thing. Direction is another one that's useful. By default, the arrow points the direction you're going to pull, and you can go forward or backwards. Our measurements will become positive or negative, but as long as there's nothing else, it will be a 3D object. We could actually do two sides, which would mean that we can drag from one direction of the profile or sketch a certain distance, and then from the other direction another way. So there's a lot of things to do. I could do symmetric, so that way it's very similar to two sides, but what happens is if you pull 5 millimeters to the left, it automatically pulls 5 millimeters to the right. You can get the equivalent results with any of these three approaches. So the default of one side is what I'm going to use. The only end result that might vary, and actually this might be important depending on what you're doing, is where in 3D space they end up. If I used one side, it's going to, and I pull to the right, which is what the default seems to be, I'm going to move this way, and the end result is that one corner of my 3D object is at the origin, and then it's however far this way. If I used symmetric, then it would be kind of exactly mirrored on the origin, and then half of it would be on the left side, half of it would be on the right side, and that might be useful for a lot of scenarios, right? If you have something that has symmetry across your entire object that you're designing, then that could be a really helpful thing to do. But of course, if that's the case, then we have to make sure that our math adds up. If this thing is 26 millimeters long or whatever number, half of it, we only have to extrude it halfway because the other half is done for us symmetrically, right? So we have to be aware of a lot of things as we're doing that. I'm going to stick with one side for now, and we'll go from there. Again, we're not going to talk about this one just yet, but we'll come back to this. It will definitely be useful. And I can drag it, and I'll just show you as I drag it. There it is. That gray is the solid object that's going to be created. And I can pull it as much as I want, or I can type out the number. If I went backwards, it would be the same thing, but our measurement would be negative. It's just another direction, right? So the magnitude is the number. The direction is either positive or negative in our 3D space. Right, so I'm going to go ahead and look at my drawing one more time. And so how long is this thing in total? So from this corner, from here to here, this kind of little wall that we haven't made yet is about 7. This long intermediate part from this corner to this corner is 39. And the last also kind of wall is 7. So we add them all up. 7 plus 7 is 14. 39 would be a total of 53 millimeters, right? Because 39 plus 7 is 46, and then 46 plus 7 would be 53. So, going back to my Fusion object, I can type in 53 here, I can type it in here, I can drag it to 53. I will simply type it 53, and there it is. Right? If I zoom out, I can pan a bit, because again, notice what happened is that it went to the right, and so I had to pan to see it a little bit better. And I can also orbit, I can drag my cube, and you can see I haven't finished this yet, but it gives me a good sense of where it is. And I'm going to go ahead and click OK. The operation by default is what we call a new body. I mentioned that we closed solid 3D objects are bodies in Fusion 360. So I'm going to click OK. It'll load a bit, and there it is. Notice what popped up in our browser, a new folder called Bodies. I open it up. There is Body 1. There's the icon for our body. Notice when I hover over it, it highlights the entire object. Notice something else. As I move over different parts of the body, these individual faces. So we had vertices or single points in 3D space, a vertex. Edges are connections or lines between two vertices. Faces are actually closed shapes on a body. A profile is also a closed shape, but still potentially 2D. And then a body is a 3D object that may be composed of many faces. Right? So there's our 3D object. I'm going to click the home view just so we can kind of see it in all its glory. Initially here, it's one perspective. If I went like to the front, there it is. It looks like a rectangle, but this is an illusion, right? This is a perspective trick because actually that's an angled face, right? If I click maybe from the top, it becomes more obvious. And notice the shadowing and stuff, but it's supposed to give us a view of the 3D. If I pick this kind of top corner, now we see this is the kind of home view that we saw this whole time. Wonderful. We have a 3D object, and we want to continue manipulating it in some way. So the next thing we can do, what can we do? I think that maybe we can try chopping off these corners. Notice that I said it was kind of like a couch, but these corners are missing, so this whole chunk is gone, and then it's symmetric on this side. So how would we go about doing this? That's, I guess, a question we can ask ourselves. So we have to decide, is this the thing we should do? Is it worth it? Do we have enough information in our drawing to establish what we're going to cut out? That's the question we have to ask, and maybe we do, maybe we don't, and then we decide from there. So our first thing to note is we do have a height here, so this would be kind of a line going up and down vertically. That's 5 millimeters. We have this line horizontally, which is 11 millimeters. This line and this line are the same, and so with those two, we have 5 and 11. That's essentially a rectangle, so we could pull it forward and chop off that corner. So I think that's what we're going to do, a 5 by 11 rectangle sketch. So now the question is, where do we make this happen, right? It's kind of hard. We can draw on this face, but the problem is it's got an angle. So let's rotate, orbit around, and look at the back side. This is a face. Sketches can be created on planes. So in the origin point like we first started, they can also be done on bodies. The key difference is if you draw a sketch from a body, then the sketch is associated with it, and therefore if you do a extrusion, you may add to that body and merge them together or cut from that body. If you did it separately as a new sketch kind of independent of anything else, they might overlap and they may or may not be considered one object. And so generally speaking, if we're going to manipulate a body in some way, we typically would like to sketch on that body. So before I click new sketch, I'm going to click on this face, and notice how it turns blue. And so it says, okay, when you click the sketch button, it's going to draw the sketch on this face. And you'll see it'll give us a camera perspective immediately. And it won't even ask me what plane we're on. It knows the plane is, in fact, this face. So here we are, create sketch. Notice it rotated it. Now I have to maybe move my view a bit by panning so it's nice in the middle. And here I am in a new sketch. Notice it popped up in my sketches folder. And then I have my tools just like last time. But this time around, instead of using a line, because we're lazy but smart, we're going to use one of their helpful tools, which is the 2-point rectangle. A 2-point rectangle says you tell it where the top left point is and the bottom right point, and it immediately draws a rectangle from those 2 points. We have other options though. If instead of clicking this button we went to the Create menu, we went to Rectangle menu, we could do a 3-point rectangle. Now that one's a little bit odd. I don't typically use it, but if you really wanted to, you could. We could also do a center point rectangle. If you knew a center point in which you wanted the rectangle to be symmetric, then this might be a better option. For our purposes, 2-point rectangle is actually just perfect. And notice we also have a shortcut, which is the R key. So we can click the button, we can click in the menu, we can click R, whatever is appropriate for us. I'm going to click on the button up here. Notice there's my cursor, and it has that crosshair and the little drawing. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit more. And here's what's nice about using a body face to draw a sketch, is that we can refer to points on this body to have like snapping connections and things like that. So notice when I hover over this corner, it puts a little square. It says, look, if you click here, the corner of our rectangle will be snapped to, connected to, or coincident with, if you want to use that word, constrained to that corner. I'm going to click it, and notice what happens is it's giving me the rectangle. I'm going to move a little bit, and notice it gives me the 2 measurements. I can type them out. It says this one's 14 by 7. I should have it. The top, if we remember, going horizontally is 11. Going up and down vertically is 5. So I'm going to click here. I should actually have typed it, but since I didn't, I'm going to go ahead and use the dimension tool. I'm going to click on this line. We said this line horizontally should be 11. There it is. And then this vertical line should be 5. And then now if I hit escape to get rid of my key, notice some things. Again, those 2 lines are black because this rectangle is totally constrained. I cannot move these at all. It's 11 by 5. Again, I'll just show us a 3D view, because at any time you can rotate the camera just to have a sense of where we are. Notice some things. I can rotate and see that this sketch is on this back corner. This is exactly what I wanted, because the idea is that if we pull this forward and scoop out what it's touching, the result is we've kind of chopped out a part of our body. So that's what we want to do. So I think I'm happy with my sketch. I can go back to the view just so we can see it. I'm going to click Finish Sketch right here on the bottom, or I can always click on top here as well. There it is. The sketch is still visible because I haven't used it for anything yet. Notice the sketch 1, which was that kind of trapezoid sketch, is not visible because we used it at least once, and we can always bring it back, but we're not going to. So I'm going to select this area, which is what I want. That's sketch 2. And then I'm going to use it to extrude. And again, I'm going to change my view just so we can see it as it happens. It's really nice to see in 3D. I'm going to select my extrusion tool. Notice the default is backwards. I'm just going to drag it so we can see what happens. If I pull back, the implication is, oh, I'm making a cube, not a cube, a perfect cube, but like a rectangular box that pulls off from the back. And then these would be merged into one body, but I want the opposite. I want it to be scooped out going forward. And Fusion is smart enough to know, it says, generally speaking, if you pull one 3D object into another, you must want to subtract the 2 or scoop or remove one from the other. So if I pull forward, notice it turns red and it says, you want to cut out. What is red is gone. And notice you can see I can put any number I want. And as we did, it's kind of going to give us a preview of what's missing. If it's in the red area, it will be gone. And actually, that's exactly what we wanted, was for this to kind of go away. So I pulled it forward. So here's where this distance or extend type is convenient. Right now, by default, the extend type is distance, so I said go 11 forward, but that's not exactly what I needed. It could be a lot less. I could also kind of guess at it, but the problem is if it's not perfectly lined up, I might miss a piece, and it may seem like it's great there, but if I zoom in, maybe it's not. And in fact, I can prove it. There it is. It's not all the way through. So how far would it go forward? That's really hard to know. So instead, let's be efficient. Instead of guessing by just pulling a number, maybe it's 9.1325. That's kind of hard to know. We will instead change our extend type to object. And I'm sorry, not object. We're going to do the third one, which is all. And notice what it does, it goes exactly as far as it needs. And you can even see that it even shows that this thing is kind of at an angle. It does not make a cube or a box because it says, okay, I'm only going as far as I need. And now if I zoom in, it's exactly to that edge, which is perfect. That's what we wanted. So extend type is all. It says, you know what, everything that you want to cut out all the way forward until there's nothing there, that's what we're chopping out. So here we are. I'm going to click OK. Notice the operation is not a body, but a cut. A cut is a subtraction of some 3D object component from another. So I'm going to click OK. And there it is. Right, so that's that first corner. Now, notice that this second sketch is gone. So now we have a lot of options because based on our drawing, we want to do the same thing on this side. What should we do? Should we create another sketch of the back face, same measurements, cut out that corner? That's one option. We could also potentially mirror things, and that's actually another thing we can try. And mirroring is even more complicated because we can do it in a sketch or outside of a sketch. There's a lot of options for this. But let's take a look at our modify menu. And so I'll just open it up so we can see some of the buttons and what they mean. Press pull is pretty much the same as extrude. There's some context where we might make it a little bit different, but for our purposes, most of the time it's very similar. Fillet and chamfer we'll come back to. These are kind of pretty useful as well in the future. But we maybe want to see, we have split body, split face. There's a bunch of different options. And so maybe I'm misremembering. So it's possible that we cannot do it in 3D space. So instead of using here, we're going to go to our, here it is. Okay, so there is our object, our mirror object. And mirror is what I was looking for. And it says, look, if you want to duplicate something across some mirror line or axis, then we could make this happen. I'm going to click on it and see if this is going to work out for us. And so notice it gives us options that says, what do you want to mirror and what plane do you want to mirror on? Now here's where the challenge is. If I click on object, I really can't mirror much. This is kind of a difficult thing because I want to mirror this cut, but the cut itself is not a body. So this thing maybe doesn't work. Now if I notice this menu, I can choose faces, features, or components. Let's try features and see. Now that is a feature. It is a subset of this body. That might be what we want. So let's try that. Mirror plane. Now this is harder, and this is where since we didn't use the origin and we didn't do the symmetric pull, this is not going to work out so great for us. Because this plane, even though I can see here, is the right face, it's the right direction we want, it's not where we want it. I don't want it on the side, I want it in the middle of this object. So this is where this maybe doesn't work out so great, using this as our mirror. So I think we're going to stop this and we're going to kind of unwind and say, you know what, instead of doing mirror from the 3D perspective, let's go back to our sketch and pull that instead. Or recreate that or mirror that instead, and then we'll be able to cut out that second half. So I'm going to cancel. Unfortunately, even though we could do it, and we could definitely make a plane right in the middle, for now we're not going to do that. Let's go back to our sketching. That might be the better choice for us as beginners. I'm going to cancel. I'm not going to worry about this. So I'm going to remake my sketch to appear. So again, I have more options. Could I make a third sketch for that other corner and then extrude that and cut out the front? I could. Or I could edit the original. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make it visible, and you can see there it is. I'm going to open it up. So double click on this. So now I'm back in the sketch, and there you can see my finished sketch button is back. And now I'm going to try the equivalent of mirroring. It's very similar, but instead of doing an object, the objects are 2D objects. The second choice is the mirror line, but I'm still missing that. But it'll be a lot easier to do. So before we do our mirror, let's add a line. And I want it to be right in the middle of this entire length, so I know it's symmetric when I do my mirroring. I'm going to hover over this edge, and notice as I click on it, if I zoom in a bit, it gives me a kind of a blue X. But if I keep going, when I hit the middle, it gives me the midpoint. That little triangle says this is the midpoint of this entire line. So I want a line that is vertical down the midpoint, and this actually is really convenient for me. One other thing I'll point out is I don't necessarily want this to be an actual separation of my sketch. So what we can do, if we hover over here, we have construction lines and center lines. I believe we want a center line, and let's find it and click it here. And if I zoom out, I'm going to, just enough so I can see it, I'm going to make sure it's, I don't want it at an angle because that's not really the center. I want it to come back here. And now notice this has even more little kind of blue things. You see the X for where we're connecting. You see the triangle, which means the midpoint. And then you also see that kind of right angle thing, which actually is perfect proof this is exactly the line that we want. So I'm going to click on it. And there it is. That's our center line. I'm going to hit escape so I don't add anything else. And notice it does recognize that it's kind of split in half. It's still one sketch, but that just kind of tells us, hey, that's a center line. That's really convenient to know. And there's that midpoint constraint that was created for us. So the last step, now we can do our mirroring. I can click mirror. What am I mirroring? I want to mirror all 4 of these lines. So I hold shift so they're all selected. If I just click on one, they kind of, actually let's see if I even need shift. Maybe I don't. One. Oh, I don't. So notice as I click them, they kind of highlight. So perfect. I can just select them. 4 things are selected, and then I can choose the mirror line. I'm going to say, what do I want to mirror? This is the mirror line. And you can see, before I even picked it, it kind of did it for me. And it says, hey, look, if you mirror these 4 things across this center mirror line, this is where it's going to end up. I'm going to click OK. Some things to note. The measurements don't come along because you don't need to duplicate measurements. And in fact, these constraints, the horizontal and vertical, also don't come along because the implication is if this is an exact mirror of this and these are vertical and these are constrained, then these must also be constrained. So there it is. We have our object, and these are the visual symbols for that mirror constraint. You can see there it is, the symmetry. This is what we're doing, which is really convenient. I think I'm done with my sketch. I'll click Finish Sketch. And then last but not least, let's go ahead and pull this the same way we pulled this one. I'm going to select this part of the sketch. I'm going to extrude. And again, I'm going to pull it a bit forward so it turns red. And then I want for it to be all. I want to just go right to that edge. And in fact, it even gives us the number. So theoretically, I could do all, get the number, and then go back to distance. And it seems to be 7.019. I'm just going to click OK. And there it is. Once we bring back a sketch to be visible, it will stay visible unless we hide it. So I'm going to go ahead and hide it. And now we have our 2 sides cut out. We'll stop here in this video, and we'll continue in another video with our object.